First off, Happy New Year's. Truly momentous time to be introducing myself. I chose this particular period of time for many of the reasons that will become apparent as I continue to offer this introduction. My name is Stelios Frankis. I'm a recent graduate from Fairfield University, where I studied finance and economics. I'm now enrolled at Hellenic College Holy Cross in the Masters of Theological Studies program. I just completed my first semester, so I graduated 2025 in the spring. And I'm delivering this message along with many other subsequent ones for the primary reason of my concerns with the ever adapting and changing systems of our human nature. Specifically, what the implications of such powerful and rapidly advancing technology means for the modern world and for the days that our children and next generations will be inheriting. I think for a long time in the common sense of things, people have been able to abdicate the responsibility of engaging with really tough questions. I myself have been a prime example of that. For most of my life, I didn't have to face the realities of, say, what it means to be a finite being in an infinitely expanding universe. Am I just a speck of dust in the grand scheme of things, or am I a microcosm of reality? Am I just a bunch of atoms made up together? Or was I made in the image of God? Just to name a few, many more will be manifesting themselves in these conversations as I extemporaneously discuss them with you. In the sense that I don't have a script in front of me, but I can promise you very truthfully that I have spent an exorbitant amount of time preparing, studying, cogitating, pensively engaging with these mind-shattering ideas, to be frank. But in the spirit of the New Year's and all of our conversations to come about resolutions, you might be wondering, what should I be focusing on? What are some things that I can really emphasize and make a point to think about more deeply? And what does that mean pragmatically? How does that translate into tangible action, measurable outcomes? So I'm not here to sell you a course. I'm here to offer a conversation. I want to engage with as many people as I possibly can and offer all of the insights and knowledge that I've accrued through the years of my studies. So I'll lay out very briefly the three kind of pillars that I'm going to be building a lot of what I'll be displaying to you off of. So stemming first philosophically, a lot of the axioms that I'll deal with and I'll engage with and I'll further inquire about are deeply rooted in namely ancient formulations of what the earliest thinkers thought of ontology, teleology, and what constitutes the good life. Is that even a real thing? Again, are we just malleable and perishable specks of being, or is there some intrinsic dignity? Is there some worth that's worth discovering? Psychologically, my interest lies in determining why it is that we can find ourselves in periods of time, if not most of the reality that we know it, being stuck in loops, unable to ever really take control, to feel like no matter how hard you attempt to break the rhythms and the patterns of your behavior, it's all consuming. What I found is that there are many spirits and faculties, compulsions, desires that our minds have that you may not be entirely consciously aware of. So the idea formally of the subconscious and the unconscious minds have been developed most notably by figures such as Carl Jung, Sigmund Freud, Erich Neumann. I just have to quickly shout out, please read The Origins and History of Consciousness by Neumann if you get the chance. Recommendation from Peterson. That book took me months to read, but I promise you it'll be worth your time. These thinkers have laid out the substructure, the scaffolding of the human psyche, and in their own regards have attempted to establish new terminology, new nomenclature, means of organizing and mapping on the realm of our psychic being. And I think these conversations are really important to have. So, bridging that into what will ultimately be the third pillar of religion, I have underwent an incomprehensible, radical transformation of being purely agnostic, maybe even atheistic at times, never paying any mind. I would say I was a cultural Christian in the sense that my family was there on major events such as Easter, but individually I had taken no time. Actually, a lot of my efforts from youth went to removing myself from any situations related to church life. So, again, I'm going to be very transparent here, but in recent times, if I were to lay out what that actually means, I wouldn't even believe myself. Most of the friends that I have that I speak to about these things, it's always interesting perceiving their reactions to it. And all of those transformations are due to the fact that I was able to find such powerful and intellectually capable figures, notably Peterson. His concepts that he builds on, I have his maps of meaning right there, I'm just getting into. I've read his other works, We Who Wrestle with God, absurd, another must read. His conceptualization of a sequence of hierarchical structures in society that determine the parameters and kind of set the guidelines for behavior and action, and whether or not you know it, whatever is placed at the pinnacle of the said structure that's presenting itself to you immediately, that is ultimately what you worship. And as I said, I have worshipped false idols, you could say, for a long time, and it's very evident in what it is that we constitute as valuable in terms of media production. I'm not going to dwell on it. We are all aware of it, of thrives in certain industries over others, it's frightening in its own regard. But again, in the redemptive contrast of things, I'm going to be focusing on the figures that have helped me legitimately transform and reestablish unification in my life. For the longest time, I had no control. The actions that I chose were not under the provision of my own being. They were being driven by, again, compulsion and standards that were set. One of the concepts that I'm going to speak on another time, the panopticon, I think is just such a lucid illustration. The notion that society has constructed such stringent and narrow pathways forward for us to behave so as to quote unquote fit in. And what does it mean to step outside of those boundaries? No one really wants to know, because you'll be, well, excluded, anathematized, met with opposition, all of which I've experienced in a lot of facets of life, most horrifyingly academically, receiving unjustifiable grades because my teachers didn't agree with what I said, although I spent a considerable amount of time, and I would beg to differ on the veracity of their judgment. So I think it's imperative of us to engage in these conversations. It is such a blessing for me to be able to have this ability to now truly grasp on to what I know I'm meant to learn and what I'm meant to do. And it's very overwhelming at times, but at the end of the day, when I have now ritualized my time reading scriptures, writing down my thoughts of the words, and deeply praying, it has become such a profound source, an impactful method for me to rejuvenate everything after a long day of engaging with really disturbing evidence, in order to support the really bold claims that I'll be making. The first essay that I'm going to be publishing on a website, which will be announced very shortly, but I argue that the disillusion of being in society arises from the desacralization of ontological foundations, and in simple terms that means living in a profane world, a world rid of the sacred and the divine. That term being borrowed from Mircea Eliade, a religious historian who I have much respect for and who will draw on his works in my essays to come. But what does it mean to separate man from God, from his creator? I will argue that ultimately decadence, despondency, and horror will ensue. The flood will come. And, well, again, to support these claims, you have to dig historically. In the 20th century, we saw the rise of ideological camps of thought manifested on large scales, and, well, the result was hundreds of millions of unnecessary and painful deaths. And I won't go into further detail about the specifics, save that for another time, but it isn't always easy to remain positive and to have an altruistic disposition relating to the pursuit of what I'm going to be doing in my life, because it's very tempting to throw your hands up and either consciously or unconsciously proclaim nihilism and just behave in a purely hedonic manner. To hell with divine virtues, what does that mean? It's very tempting, it's very luring. I fell into that trap many times, and I'm here to offer my guide that I've learned through all the studying, through all of the genuine transformations that I've made in the relationships in my lives, how I treat others around me, how I treat my community. And I know these are all bold claims, but again, what I promise here is full transparency. So, I really just, again, I want to be able to curate an environment to make people comfortable to talk about the problems that we all know we have but are sometimes too scared to speak about. I, for one, held many of those issues to myself and drowned them in substance or attachment to things or people I knew I shouldn't be with in many capacities. I've stretched out the investigations of my limits to conjuring up endless means of unnecessary pain and suffering because of my own inability to recognize what needed to be done. And so, again, in this new age that we're entering into, I believe this paradigm shift will be the most impactful, decisive moment in all of history. I do not say that lightly. I have studied the technological revolutions. We have lived through many already. But what is yet to come in relation to quantum computing, to the new AI, what the implications of that means for our children, for education specifically, is where I want to focus on. But one thing, again, I talk about in this essay to come out is what happens when those programs are built on anthropological assumptions that are predicated on secular bases. You know, one of the putrid arguments that I come across often from opponents of religious thinking is that we need to encourage a pluralistic society, we need to be all-encompassing, we need to be non-sectarian, to borrow from one. It's so alarming. I don't actually believe they think this to be true in the ultimate sense of things, because, well, in order to guide any action, you have to discriminate against all other possibilities. In order to think something, if you are doing it in a depthful manner, you have to look at all of what you can focus your attention on, rank order them, sacrifice everything else, and focus on what's at the top of it. And the same comes for every action that lays itself out to you. Everyone will be dealt with a seemingly infinite number of possibilities to participate in. So how is it that we're able to discern and deliberate which are the right pathways forward? I think it's very clear in a lot of regards we're going down the wrong pathways in our society. And then the question arises is, what the hell would life look like if those doors were shut? And what if everyone, in their own regard, I'm not saying it's only one, there's multiple domains that need to be investigated, but again, for the purposes of this channel, if you're interested in uncovering, unearthing the inner layers of the psychic condition, what it means to be, what it means to know that there's an end, what does that end mean? And how can I truly come in control of my life so that all of the dreams and aspirations that I know I have can actually be made real? And also, are those dreams actually in full alignment? Because I once held dreams that were very large in the direction of my formal studies, and well, I was met with a sequence of very lucid visions that showed me what I would become, and I could never turn back there. I could never proceed. And again, I'm very thankful to be able to continue this journey, and I truly do pray that I'll be able to offer many words of benefit to whoever listens. I look forward to engaging with people I disagree with. I think the open communication is paramount importance. If you want the classical articulation of that, read a little bit of Voltaire. That's where I was first introduced to that idea in my social and political philosophy course at Fairfield. And it's painful to have to speak to everyone and to be able to defend all of your beliefs. I mean, that's why most of the time we don't do that. And that's why for the longest time I couldn't do this. And I have a lot more to prove myself, and I promise you, I have many works to come. I've been drawing out a series of videos or lectures for educational purposes for you to engage with these questions and to be presented with information that can truly edify you. I've spent at least 16 months in that. I have the first essay, which I'll be showing you, working on that for the greater part of 8 months. I have some of my formal coursework that I will be publishing. Most recently I wrote on the topic of original sin, and again, this is an idea that you can place it in the purely theological sense of things. And that's what I did for the most part of my paper, is I drew out from the primary sources from 16 centuries ago, the Pelagius and Augustine controversy, and their different notions of pure autonomy and free will versus the predestination and salvation by grace alone. But then inevitably I had to take it a step further in that, what does the condition of fallen nature mean? And well, it's interesting because in the philosophical domain you have the Enlightenment philosophers typically like to start out with some formulation of what initial reality was composed of. What springs to mind immediately is the Hobbesian notion. Thomas Hobbes and his Leviathan mapped out the brutish nature of the barbaric and utterly senseless and just brutish people who we are, unless there's what he conceptualizes the Leviathan, the fully functioning and rule-setting government apparatus or edifice. And then you also have to think of it psychologically, and it's, what does it mean to grasp that the first people were exiled from the Garden of Eden. When God sets the cherubim, the flaming swords, at the gates, because of acquiring forbidden knowledge, we are no longer able to participate in that specific realm. And again, I'll save the full expositions of this, but just to draw on one of the topics and showing you how, again, these pillars can be drawn out, and there's obviously substructures of each. And as I was saying earlier about what about the AI and the information that they're trained on, at the bottom of the information that's setting the limits for it to present you with information. We've seen multiple times throughout the year in the major platforms, they have a tendency to grip onto certain things in both directions. I'm not saying it's in one or the other, but again, the anthropological assumptions are imperative. We need to understand what information these systems will be fed. And so that's another domain I really do intend to contribute to in those conversations. So AI and ethics, I mean, that's what's next in the philosophical domain. You're already seeing it, but that's what really needs a lot of attention right now. So I hope to bring more light to that and to contribute with my method. And I could continue forever. I love speaking on these things. I have, as I said, conversations about them very frequently. And again, if you have this sort of propensity to discover what truly drives human behavior, why systems of belief are so powerful enough to manifest in horrible ways, but in the right and beautiful way of things, very, you could say poetically, or you could say divinely, and how it is that we're supposed to discover the fact that, as Christ says, the kingdom of heaven is within us all. So, it's another verse that struck me nearly dead for a long time, but it's beautiful, and I'll revisit that idea. And I think that's why the thinkers that I laid out focus on the individual, individuation in the Jungian sense, centroversion for Neumann, and Peterson's great emphasis on the adoption of maximal responsibility as the pathway forward to a meaningful, productive life is so important. So, thank you for listening. I very much look forward to producing more work. I know it will be of benefit if you engage with the questions, not just with what I'm saying, but truly attempt to discuss these things with your friends too, but importantly with yourself. And I look forward to reading all feedback and comments, and use this time to truly begin to set the foundations that will give rise to the order that we all crave very much in a very destabilized world. So, thank you again, and I will see you very soon.